The doctors said it was over. The machines had already stopped arguing. Time of death was being prepared to be written down. But outside the glass, a German shepherd refused to sit. He refused to lie down. He refused to believe this was the end. They said it was just a scratch. Too small to matter. Too harmless to look at twice. But what if God hides miracles in the smallest places? So only those who truly listen can find them. This is not just the story of a Navy SEAL who almost died. This is the story of the one who would not walk away when everyone else already had. Dawn had not yet decided whether it wanted to arrive. Norfolk, Virginia lay suspended in a gray half-light where the Atlantic wind carried the smell of salt, diesel fuel, and cold metal. The harbor was unusually quiet, its cranes frozen like long-necked birds, their shadows stretching across wet concrete. A low mist clung to the water, drifting between docked cargo ships, as if the sea itself were holding its breath. The temperature hovered just above freezing, cold enough to stiffen fingers, but not cold enough to wake the city. This was the hour when honest work paused and dishonest work felt safest. Jack Miller moved through that stillness without sound. He was 38 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of build that came from years of disciplined training rather than vanity. His hair was dark brown, cut close to the scalp in a style that hadn't changed in over a decade, and faint lines traced the edges of his eyes, marks left by sun, exhaustion, and decisions that never fully loosened their grip. His face carried a calm severity, not unkind, but guarded, as though every expression passed through a filter of caution before being allowed to surface. He wore a black Navy SEAL tactical uniform, matte and functional, fitted with body armor and a headset tucked behind one ear. A rifle rested easily in his grip, not clutched, not displayed. Just there, like a familiar extension of his body. Beside him moved Atlas. Atlas was a German shepherd, just over 5 years old, large even for his breed, with a thick coat of black and deep brown fur that caught faint hints of silver along his muzzle. His ears stood erect, constantly adjusting to distant sounds the human ear could never catch. His eyes were dark and alert, carrying an intelligence that felt less trained than earned. Atlas was not restless or eager. He moved with controlled patience, each step measured, each pause intentional. His harness bore the quiet markings of military service, scuffed from use, functional rather than proud. To Jack, Atlas was not a dog in the sentimental sense. He was a partner, a witness. Sometimes, when Jack didn't trust his own thoughts, Atlas became the only thing that felt unquestionably real. They were there on a routine assignment, if anything in Jack's line of work could ever be called routine. A security sweep of an older section of the port had been ordered after irregular shipping records raised questions about a cold storage warehouse near the water's edge. No weapons alerts. No intelligence pointing to hostile presence. Just anomalies, the kind that either meant nothing at all or everything later on. Jack preferred assignments like this. Quiet, clean, no shouting, no rushing, no chaos. Chaos had a way of demanding mistakes. The warehouse loomed ahead, its corrugated metal exterior faded by decades of sea air. Rust traced the seams like old scars. A single security light buzzed weakly above a side entrance, casting a sickly yellow glow onto the pavement. Jack raised a gloved hand, and Atlas halted instantly, body lowering slightly, attention sharpening. Jack scanned the perimeter, then nodded once. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply. Cold storage units still hummed faintly, though most of the space had been abandoned years ago. The air smelled of ice, old plastic, and something faintly organic that had no clear identity. Jack's boots echoed softly against the concrete floor as he moved between stacked pallets and metal shelving. Atlas stayed close, nose working the air, tail low but steady. They reached a cluster of sealed containers near the back of the warehouse. According to shipping logs, these crates were meant to be empty. They were not. Jack crouched, inspecting the seals. One container bore fresh scratches near its latch, shallow but recent. He frowned slightly, more out of habit than alarm. Using a small tool, he loosened the latch and eased the container open just enough to peer inside. Cold air spilled out, biting against his face. Inside were layers of insulated packaging, tightly wrapped. Jack reached in to shift one of the bundles, angling it toward the light. As he did, his left wrist brushed against the edge of a jagged metal bracket hidden beneath the insulation. There was a brief sting, sharp but small. Jack withdrew his hand and glanced down. A thin red line marked his wrist, barely more than a scratch. No blood dripped, no pain lingered. He flexed his fingers once, shrugged the glove back into place, and continued working. Atlas, however, stopped moving. The dog's head turned sharply toward Jack's wrist. His nostrils flared as he stepped closer, nose hovering inches from the glove. A low, almost inaudible sound escaped his throat. Not a growl, not a whine, but something in between. "It's nothing," Jack murmured, more to the quiet space than to the dog. He had learned long ago that talking calmed his own nerves more than anyone else's. "Stay focused." Atlas did not move away. His eyes flicked from Jack's wrist to his face and back again, ears angling slightly backward. Jack noticed, registered it, then dismissed it. Atlas was trained to respond to unfamiliar scents. Warehouses were full of those. Jack resealed the container and marked it for further inspection. He completed the sweep without incident, documenting the irregularities and securing the area. Outside, the mist had thinned, and the first suggestion of dawn brushed the horizon with pale blue. The harbor remained quiet, as if nothing had happened at all. As they walked back toward the vehicle, Atlas fell into step at Jack's side, but his posture had changed. He kept closer than usual, occasionally lifting his nose toward Jack's arm. Jack felt the faint tug of awareness, but ignored it. He had learned, sometimes painfully, that not every feeling deserved attention. Experience had taught him to prioritize evidence over instinct, control over curiosity, discipline over doubt. They reached the edge of the pier where waves lapped softly against concrete pylons. Jack paused, taking in the view. Norfolk was beginning to stir, the distant hum of traffic, a gull crying somewhere overhead. Another assignment completed, another box checked. Atlas sat at his side, eyes still fixed on Jack's wrist. Jack rested a gloved hand on the dog's head, giving a brief, absent-minded pat. "Good work," he said quietly. Atlas did not respond in the way he usually did. He remained tense, watchful, as though the assignment was not yet over. Jack turned away from the water and headed back toward the base, unaware that the smallest detail, the one he had dismissed without a second thought, had already begun to change everything. The vehicle rolled away from the harbor as dawn sharpened into full morning. Norfolk woke in fragments, a distant horn from the river, tires hissing over damp asphalt, the low, mechanical hum of a city stretching its limbs. Jack Miller drove with one hand on the wheel, eyes forward, posture rigid, already shifting his mind to the next obligation. The mission was complete. The warehouse was secured. Nothing more was required of him. Behind him, Atlas did not lie down. The German shepherd stood braced in the transport area, weight distributed evenly on all four paws, head angled forward. His breathing was controlled but heavy, nostrils flaring with every passing second. He leaned subtly toward Jack's left side, nose lifting again and again as if pulled by an invisible thread. Each time the vehicle slowed or turned, Atlas adjusted, muscles tightening, attention sharpening. Jack noticed within the first minute. By the second, he chose to ignore it. "Stand down," Jack said, not turning around. His voice was calm, clipped, the tone he used when he expected obedience without discussion. Atlas did not respond. The road curved inland, away from the docks. Streetlights blinked off one by one as daylight took control. Jack flexed his fingers against the steering wheel. A faint heat pulsed beneath the skin of his wrist, subtle but persistent. He glanced down briefly. The scratch was still there, thin and unimpressive, barely worth remembering. Minor injury, no bleeding, no swelling. Jack exhaled through his nose and pressed the accelerator a fraction harder. Atlas let out a short, sharp breath, not a sound meant for attention, but one that slipped through control. He stepped forward as far as the harness allowed, nose hovering closer to Jack's shoulder. Jack's jaw tightened. He had learned to trust patterns. Patterns saved lives. This did not fit one. The base perimeter appeared ahead, fencing stretching along the road like a drawn line between order and uncertainty. A guard stepped into view, rifle slung across his chest. Thomas Reed. Jack recognized him instantly. Reed was new, still careful in the way he stood, too aware of rules, too eager to follow them. Tall, narrow-framed, with a face that hadn't yet learned to hide nerves behind confidence. Reed raised a hand. Jack slowed and rolled down the window. "Morning, sir," Reed said, scanning credentials. His eyes flicked past Jack, landing on Atlas. He paused a beat, too long. "Morning," Jack replied. Reed hesitated. "Your dog looks tense." "He's fine," Jack said. The answer came quickly, decisively. Reed nodded, unwilling to question further, and waved them through. Inside the base, the rhythm of routine took over. Vehicles moved with purpose. Personnel crossed open spaces with coffee cups and clipped strides. Jack parked near his quarters and shut off the engine. The sudden silence rang in his ears. Atlas remained standing. Jack turned halfway in his seat. At ease. Atlas did not sit. For a brief moment, irritation flared. Jack pulled off his glove and looked again at his wrist. The skin around the scratch had darkened slightly, flushed in a way that felt wrong, but still not alarming. He rolled his wrist once, testing it. Movement was fine. Strength intact. "Enough," Jack muttered, more sharply now. Atlas lowered his head but did not step back. They exited the vehicle. Jack moved faster than usual, stride purposeful, intent on breaking the moment before it could settle into doubt. Atlas stayed glued to his side, shoulder nearly brushing Jack's leg. A few heads turned as they passed. Atlas's tension was visible now, no longer subtle. Sarah Collins spotted them from across the walkway. Sarah worked logistics, civilian side. Early 40s, medium height, lean, capable frame, shaped by long hours and little patience for inefficiency. Her blonde hair was tied back tight, no loose strands, no wasted motion. People trusted her because she listened before speaking and because she never raised her voice. Years earlier, she had lost her younger brother during an overseas deployment. The grief had not softened her, but it had sharpened her attention to details others missed. She slowed as Jack approached. "You're back early." "Routine sweep," Jack said without breaking stride. Her eyes dropped to his bare wrist. "Just for a second. You're bleeding." "It's nothing." Atlas stopped. The sudden halt pulled Jack up short. Atlas planted himself directly in front of Jack, blocking his path, head lifted, eyes locked on Jack's face. The dog's breathing quickened, controlled but urgent. Sarah froze. "Jack?" "Move," Jack said. Atlas did not move. The air tightened. A few nearby personnel slowed, sensing the disruption. Jack felt heat crawl up his neck. He crouched, meeting Atlas eye to eye. Up close, the dog's pupils were wide, fixed with singular purpose. This was not confusion. This was insistence. Jack lowered his voice. "You're out of line." Atlas's nose dipped, brushing Jack's wrist. The contact sent a brief jolt through Jack's arm. Not pain. Something deeper. Wrong. Sarah stepped closer. "That's not like him." Jack straightened abruptly. "He's tired." Sarah did not argue, but her eyes stayed on Atlas. "He doesn't look tired." Jack clipped the leash tighter and guided Atlas past her. The dog resisted for a fraction of a second, then followed, muscles coiled, head turning back toward Jack's arm as if memorizing it. Inside Jack's quarters, the door shut with a dull thud. Jack stripped off his gear faster than usual, movements sharp, impatient. Atlas remained standing near the bed, refusing to settle. Jack sat down heavily. The room felt warmer than before. He rolled his shoulders, then leaned forward, elbows on knees. The pulse in his wrist felt stronger now, rhythmic but uneven. Atlas stepped closer and pressed his nose firmly against the scratch. Jack closed his eyes. "Enough," he said again, quieter now. Atlas stayed. Jack lay back on the bed, exhaustion dropping over him like a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying. His breathing slowed. The room blurred at the edges. Atlas remained standing beside him, unmoving, eyes fixed, body tense. Outside, the base carried on. Orders were issued. Radios crackled. The day advanced without hesitation. Inside the room, a warning went unanswered. Night settled over the naval base without ceremony. The air cooled rapidly after sunset, carrying the damp chill of the nearby Atlantic. Lights flickered on across the compound in orderly rows, illuminating walkways, dormitory windows, and the quiet geometry of military life winding down. Inside the residential wing, the day's noise thinned to muted footsteps and distant voices, the kind that faded quickly behind closed doors. Jack Miller lay on his bed fully dressed, boots still on, one arm resting across his chest. He had told himself he would remove his gear after a few minutes of rest. He had told himself a lot of things. The room felt warmer than it should have, the air thick, pressing against his lungs. His breathing was shallow, controlled by habit rather than comfort. Every inhale required a fraction more effort than the last. Atlas stood beside the bed. The German shepherd had not sat once since they entered the room. His body remained rigid, muscles drawn tight beneath his coat, ears angled forward. His eyes never left Jack's face. Every few seconds, his nose dipped toward Jack's wrist, catching the scent that now carried a sharper edge. Atlas had stopped pacing. The stillness was deliberate, watchful. Jack stared at the ceiling, counting breaths without meaning to. His heartbeat felt uneven, skipping in a way that set off alarms in the back of his mind. He shifted his weight slightly, testing himself. The movement sent a sudden, sharp pressure through his chest. Not pain at first, pressure, as if something heavy had been placed directly over his sternum. He frowned and sat up. The room tilted. Jack planted his boots on the floor, steadying himself. A thin sheen of sweat had formed along his hairline, cold and slick. His left arm tingled, not numb but distant, as if it no longer belonged entirely to him. He flexed his fingers once, twice. The motion felt slow. Atlas stepped closer, a low sound vibrating in his chest, raw and urgent. "I'm fine," Jack said, though his voice came out rougher than expected. He rose to his feet. The pressure surged. This time it hurt. Jack staggered one step forward, hand reaching instinctively for the wall. His vision narrowed, the edges darkening as if someone had turned down the lights inside his head. His breath caught mid-inhale, refused to complete the motion. His heart slammed hard once, then faltered. Atlas barked, a sharp, explosive sound that tore through the quiet hallway beyond the room. Jack dropped to one knee. The pain spiked, radiating outward from his chest, down his arm, up into his jaw. His body betrayed him with brutal efficiency. Years of conditioning could not override chemistry. He collapsed forward, shoulder striking the floor, breath knocked from his lungs. Atlas lunged, claws scraping against tile as he pressed his body against Jack's side. The dog barked again, louder now, frantic. He nudged Jack's shoulder with his nose, then his wrist, whining sharply when Jack did not respond. Jack's vision fractured. Sounds stretched and distorted. Somewhere far away, a door opened. Voices shouted. Footsteps pounded toward the room. Atlas howled. The sound was unlike anything he had made before. Not a warning, not a command. It was raw panic, torn straight from instinct. Two figures rushed in. One was Daniel Harper, a corpsman assigned to the residential wing. Harper was in his early 30s, broad through the chest with close-cropped black hair and a face shaped by years of emergency response. He moved fast, but not frantically, dropping to his knees beside Jack, fingers already checking pulse points. "He's alive," Harper said sharply. "Call it in." The second figure, a junior officer whose name Jack would never learn, froze at the doorway, eyes wide. Atlas snapped once in his direction, a sharp warning that kept him back. Harper did not flinch. He had worked with military dogs before. He knew when to respect them. Jack gasped, a thin, broken sound. His chest heaved once, then stilled. "Stay with me," Harper ordered, pressing his palm against Jack's sternum. "Stay with me." Atlas pressed closer, his body trembling, nose inches from Jack's face. Within minutes, the room filled with motion. Medics arrived with a stretcher. Orders were shouted, equipment deployed. Atlas refused to move until Harper clipped a temporary lead to his harness and guided him back just enough for them to work. Even then, Atlas strained forward, eyes wild, breath coming in harsh bursts. Jack's consciousness flickered. The ceiling lights blurred into streaks as he was lifted, strapped down, rushed through hallways that echoed with urgency. His heart stuttered again, then again, alarm shrieking in response. The ambulance ride was a rush of cold air and red lights. A medic named Laura Bennett worked over him, her blonde hair pulled back tightly beneath her cap, her expression focused, unyielding. She was compact, efficient, her movements precise. She had learned long ago not to waste time on fear. "Arrhythmia," she said to no one in particular. "Pressure's dropping." Jack tried to speak. Nothing came out. Atlas rode in the front, restrained, whining softly, his entire body angled toward the compartment behind him. The military hospital rose ahead of them, a low, modern structure near the coastline, its windows glowing against the dark. Salt air mixed with antiseptic as Jack was rushed through automatic doors into the emergency bay. The sound of monitors replaced the sound of waves. Doctors descended quickly. Hands moved with practiced coordination. Questions were asked and answered in clipped phrases. Jack drifted in and out, fragments of awareness slipping through like shards of light. Atlas was stopped at the doors. The dog fought it. His nails scraped against the polished floor as he lunged forward, barking, pulling hard against the handlers now restraining him. His eyes never left the gurney. Jack's heart lurched violently once more. Then everything went quiet. Inside the emergency room, machines took over what Jack's body could no longer manage on its own. A physician stepped forward, tall and gray-haired, his face lined with experience and restraint. His name was Robert Hayes, head of emergency medicine for the facility. He assessed the monitors quickly, jaw tightening. "Severe arrhythmia," Hayes said. "No clear trauma. Start full workup." Outside, Atlas collapsed into a sit, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the closed doors. His body shook with restrained energy, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. Jack Miller slipped fully into unconsciousness without a sound. The military hospital never truly slept. Even at its quietest hours, the building hummed with restrained urgency, lights glowing behind frosted glass, machines breathing in steady mechanical rhythms. Outside, the ocean wind swept across the parking lot, carrying salt and cold, rattling flagpoles and bending the low coastal trees. Inside the emergency wing, time narrowed to numbers on screens and clipped voices moving faster than thought. Jack Miller lay motionless on the hospital bed, his body framed by wires, tubes, and monitors that translated flesh into data. His skin had taken on a muted gray tone beneath the harsh lights, the color of someone whose body was fighting a battle without fully understanding the enemy. His chest rose and fell with mechanical assistance, each breath measured, controlled, impersonal. Doctor Robert Hayes stood at the foot of the bed, arms folded, eyes fixed on the monitor. He was in his late 50s, tall and lean, with silver hair kept short and a face that carried the calm authority of a man who had pronounced both recoveries and deaths with the same steady voice. Hayes had served as a military physician for most of his life. He believed in protocols because protocols saved lives. He also knew their limits, though he rarely admitted it aloud. "Cardiac enzymes are elevated," a resident reported, her voice steady but tight. "EKG shows persistent arrhythmia. Blood pressure continues to drop." Hayes nodded once. "No signs of trauma, no infection markers. Tox screen is clean." "Clean," another doctor echoed, scrolling through results. "Nothing that explains this." They moved efficiently, methodically. Fluids were administered, medications adjusted, machines recalibrated. Each action followed training, each decision supported by evidence. Yet nothing changed. Jack's heart refused to settle into a stable rhythm. His body resisted every attempt to bring it back into alignment. "He's in acute heart failure," the resident said quietly, as if lowering her voice might soften the truth. "But the cause is still unclear." Hayes stared at the monitor longer than necessary. "We treat what we see," he said at last. "Keep him stable. Run the tests again." Outside the glass wall of the intensive care unit, Atlas paced. The German shepherd had been restrained by a temporary barrier a short distance from the door. His large frame moved back and forth with increasing agitation, claws clicking against the polished floor. Every few seconds he stopped abruptly, head snapping up, ears rigid, eyes locked on the room beyond the glass. When nurses passed, Atlas growled low in his chest, a warning rather than a threat. Security personnel hovered nearby, uncertain. They were accustomed to military dogs, but this was different. Atlas was not responding to commands. He was responding to something else. He barked suddenly, a sharp, insistent sound that echoed down the corridor. His front paws struck the glass, once, twice, leaving faint smears behind. The sound cut through the sterile calm, turning heads. "That dog again," one nurse muttered, irritation flickering across her face. "Can someone move him?" "Careful," another replied. "He's not just any dog." Atlas barked again, louder this time, his body trembling with contained force. His eyes never left Jack. That was when Emily Carter noticed him. Emily was 29, slim and slightly under average height, with dark hair pulled back into a loose ponytail that always escaped regulation by a few strands. Her face was open, observant, framed by tired eyes that missed very little. She had joined the military nursing corps 3 years earlier, driven by a mix of idealism and quiet stubbornness. Growing up, she had lived with a father who suffered from undiagnosed medical issues for years, dismissed repeatedly because nothing obvious showed up in tests. He had died waiting for answers. Since then, Emily had learned to trust patterns that didn't always appear on charts. She slowed her steps as Atlas barked again. The sound wasn't random. Emily realized that immediately. There was rhythm to it, urgency, the kind that came from recognition, not fear. She approached cautiously, kneeling a few feet away. "Hey," she said softly, her voice calm, grounded. "Easy." Atlas turned toward her, eyes wild but focused. He did not bare his teeth. He did not retreat. He simply stared, then turned his head sharply back toward the glass. Emily followed his gaze. Inside, Jack's monitor spiked, then dipped again. "What's going on?" she asked one of the nurses passing by. "Officer Miller," the nurse replied. "SEAL. Acute heart failure. No cause." Emily looked back at Atlas. The dog barked again and pawed the glass, this time more deliberately, striking near the level of Jack's arm, her brow furrowed. She stood and moved closer to the door, peering through the glass. Jack lay still, his left arm resting along his side, partially obscured by sheets and equipment. Something about the angle caught her attention. She leaned closer, narrowing her eyes. "Has anyone fully examined his arm?" she asked. The nurse frowned. "There's no trauma." "I didn't ask about trauma." The nurse hesitated. There was a minor scratch noted in intake. Nothing significant. Atlas barked again, sharper now, as if punctuating the statement. Emily felt a chill crawl up her spine. She had seen this before. Symptoms that didn't add up. Causes dismissed because they didn't look dramatic enough. She turned to the security officer nearby. "Can you give us a moment?" she asked, already moving toward the door controls. Inside the room, Hayes glanced up as the door opened. "What is it?" Emily stepped in, keeping her voice steady. "Sir, the dog has been reacting consistently to the patient's left arm." Hayes frowned. "We're not basing treatment on a dog." "I'm not asking you to," Emily replied. "I'm asking you to look." Hayes hesitated. A second too long. Then he sighed. "Fine. Quick check." Emily moved to Jack's side and gently adjusted the sheet, exposing his forearm. Under the bright lights, the skin appeared slightly discolored near the wrist. A faint redness, almost imperceptible unless you were looking for it. Emily leaned closer. "Do you smell that?" Hayes bent down, nostrils flaring slightly. His expression shifted, just a fraction. "Get a light." A pen light illuminated the area. The skin around the scratch had darkened, the color uneven, spreading subtly beneath the surface. Hayes straightened. His voice dropped. "That's not cardiac." Outside, Atlas went still. Inside the room, the certainty that had guided every decision began to fracture. Jack's heart stuttered again on the monitor, the line trembling, unstable. Medicine had reached its limit. The shift changed without announcement. No alarm sounded, no machines failed. Yet inside the intensive care unit, something subtle but irreversible had occurred. The voices grew quieter. The movements slowed. The urgency that once filled the room thinned into restraint, the kind born when effort begins to feel ceremonial rather than hopeful. Jack Miller lay suspended between numbers and breath. The ventilator guided his lungs with mechanical patience, each rise of his chest perfectly timed, perfectly artificial. His heart continued to falter, the rhythm uneven, stubbornly resistant to correction. The monitors no longer startled anyone when they dipped. They were expected to dip. Dr. Robert Hayes stood near the glass wall, shoulders slightly slumped for the first time that night. Under the harsh white lights, his silver hair looked dull, his face more deeply lined than before. Decades of emergency medicine had trained him to recognize patterns, and this pattern led to one conclusion: he had learned not to rush, but never to deny. "We've reached the limit," he said quietly to the team. "If there's no response after the next cycle, we need to prepare." No one asked him to clarify what prepare meant. A resident nodded once. A nurse lowered her eyes. The machines continued their steady work, indifferent to the weight of the conversation happening around them. Outside the glass, Atlas stopped moving. The German shepherd had paced for nearly an hour, claws clicking softly against the floor, breath sharp and restless. Now he stood frozen, his large frame drawn tight, tail low, ears rigid. His eyes locked onto Jack's body beyond the barrier with an intensity that bordered on painful. He no longer barked, no longer scratched. The urgency had condensed into something sharper, more focused, as if every instinct he possessed had narrowed to a single point. Emily Carter noticed immediately. She had been moving between rooms, assisting where needed, absorbing the quiet exhaustion of the unit. At 29, Emily still carried traces of youth in her face, but her eyes were older, shaped by nights like this one. She was slender, quick on her feet, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that loosened as shifts dragged on. Her calm demeanor made patients trust her. Her refusal to dismiss discomfort made doctors occasionally uneasy. She slowed her steps when Atlas stopped. Dogs did not go still like that without reason. Emily approached, kneeling a few feet away. "Hey," she said softly. Atlas did not look at her. His gaze remained fixed on the glass. Emily followed his line of sight. Jack lay exactly as he had for the past hour. No visible change, no sudden deterioration. Yet the dog's body told a different story. Atlas let out a low, broken sound, barely audible, vibrating deep in his chest. He lifted one paw and set it down again, restrained, controlled, as if holding himself back. Emily felt a familiar tightening in her stomach. She had seen this before, not in dogs, but in people, in families who insisted something was wrong long after charts declared stability, in patients who deteriorated quietly while numbers still looked acceptable. Her father had been one of them. Complaints dismissed, symptoms labeled vague, the truth uncovered too late. Emily stood and moved closer to the glass, pressing her palm against it without realizing she had done so. Inside, Hayes turned away from the bed, speaking in low tones to another physician. The word withdrawal passed between them, soft but unmistakable. Atlas suddenly barked, not loud, not frantic. One sharp, deliberate sound. Several heads turned. "That dog again," a nurse muttered. "He needs to be removed." Emily did not agree. She stepped forward instead. "Sir," she said, addressing Hayes through the open doorway. "Before we proceed, may I ask something?" Hayes looked at her, weary but attentive. "Go ahead." "The dog hasn't changed behavior since the patient arrived," Emily said. "He's reacting to the same area consistently." Hayes exhaled slowly. "We've discussed this." "I know," Emily replied, "but he's not agitated. He's focused." Hayes glanced toward Atlas. The dog stood perfectly still now, eyes burning with intent. "What are you suggesting?" Hayes asked. Emily hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I'm suggesting we look again, specifically at the arm." Silence followed. "We examined him," a resident said. "There's no trauma." Emily nodded. "I understand. I'm not talking about trauma." Atlas barked again, closer this time, stepping forward until the handler tightened the leash. Emily felt the urgency rise in her chest. "Something is being missed," she said, more firmly now. "The symptoms don't align cleanly, and that dog hasn't been wrong once tonight." Hayes studied her face. He saw the conviction there, unpolished but steady. He had seen it before in good clinicians, the kind that made you uncomfortable because it challenged certainty. He turned his gaze back to Jack's bed. "What exactly do you want checked?" he asked. Emily swallowed. The scratch on his wrist, properly, under direct light. Atlas went still again. The room held its breath. Hayes hesitated, then nodded once. "All right," he said. "Let's take another look." The sentence landed with more weight than anyone expected. Emily released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Outside the glass, Atlas let out a low whine, not panic, not relief, but recognition. The light snapped on, and everything accelerated. Under the focused beam, the room lost its softness. The glare stripped away hesitation, exposing Jack Miller's left wrist with brutal clarity. The sheet was pulled back in one clean motion. No discussion, no ceremony. The moment demanded speed. Dr. Robert Hayes leaned in immediately. His earlier caution was gone, replaced by sharp concentration. The discoloration was obvious now, spreading outward from the scratch in uneven shadows beneath the skin. It did not look like bruising. It did not behave like inflammation. It sat there, quiet and patient, as if it had been waiting. "That's not normal," Hayes said. Emily Carter was already closer. She caught the scent again, faint but unmistakable, cutting through antiseptic and plastic. Metallic, dry, wrong. "There," she said quickly. "That smell. It's stronger under the light." Atlas stood rigid at the threshold, held loosely now by the handler. His eyes never left the wrist. When the lamp passed over the skin, his body tensed further, a low sound vibrating through his chest. No panic, no noise wasted. This was confirmation. "Magnification," Hayes ordered. The derm scope was placed over the scratch. The image sharpened. Microfractures along the skin's edge appeared, subtle disruptions that did not match accidental injury. Something had entered without force, without drama. "A contact toxin," Emily said. "Through the skin." Hayes nodded once. "Slow acting." A young physician stepped forward. Mark Lewis, recently transferred, slim-build, dark hair perpetually disordered, eyes alert with the kind of focus that came from still believing medicine could solve everything if you looked hard enough. "But the tox screen—" "Didn't look for this," Hayes cut in. "Standard panels never do." Jack's monitor spiked sharply, then dipped again. The line wavered, unstable. "We're running out of time," a nurse said. Hayes turned. "Call toxicology, now." The room moved as one. Phones lifted, drawers opened, equipment shifted positions. Atlas lifted his head higher, muscles tight, tracking every movement. He had been waiting for this change. Toxicology arrived fast. Linda Morales entered without hesitation. Mid-40s, compact, dark hair streaked with gray, pulled back severely. Her eyes were sharp, unblinking. Years of dealing with unseen killers had carved urgency into her posture. She took one look at the wrist, leaned in, and inhaled once. "Marine," she said immediately. Hayes straightened. "You're sure?" "Dry marine toxin," Morales replied. "Transferred from a surface. Absorbed through a break in the skin. No injection needed." Emily's pulse jumped. "It mimics cardiac failure." Morales nodded. "Electrical interference. Slow onset. Easy to miss." Jack's heart stumbled again on the monitor, the rhythm degrading. "Antidote?" Hayes asked. Morales did not hesitate. "Yes, if we act now." That was all the permission needed. The antidote was pulled from secure storage. Clear liquid, unremarkable. Nothing about it suggested the weight it carried. The syringe was prepped in seconds. Atlas went perfectly still. "Administer," Hayes said. The injection was clean, controlled. The antidote entered Jack's bloodstream quietly, without drama. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. The monitor continued its uneven pattern. Emily's hands clenched at her sides. Then the line shifted. One beat corrected itself. Not fully, not cleanly, but differently. "There," Lewis said, barely breathing. Another beat followed, less chaotic, slightly stronger. Hayes leaned closer. Again. The rhythm began to reorganize, imperfect, but moving away from collapse. The room exhaled as one. Atlas released a low sound, deep and restrained, his body relaxing just enough to signal recognition. He did not move closer. He did not celebrate. His job had been to insist. The rest was no longer his. Jack's heart was still fragile. The danger was not over. But the invisible enemy had been named, exposed, and finally challenged. What had hidden beneath the skin no longer had the advantage. The first sign was not dramatic. It was quiet. A correction so small it could have been missed if everyone in the room had not been leaning forward, watching the monitor as if their collective attention might steady the line. Jack Miller's heart did not surge back to strength. It adjusted. One beat found its place. Then another followed, less erratic than before. The machine acknowledged the change with a softened tone, no longer shrill with warning, but cautious, tentative. Dr. Robert Hayes did not speak. He simply raised a hand, signaling the room to hold. The rhythm continued. Fragile, imperfect, but moving in the right direction. Emily Carter felt her shoulders drop for the first time in hours. The tightness in her chest loosened just enough for her to breathe fully. She stayed where she was, hands clasped in front of her, eyes fixed on Jack's face. Color had not yet returned, but the grayness had receded slightly, like fog pulling back from shore. "Maintain support," Hayes said quietly. "Do not rush this." Around them, the room shifted from crisis to control. Movements became deliberate again. Voices dropped to measured tones. The antidote continued its slow work, countering what had crept silently through Jack's system. The enemy had been identified. That alone changed everything. At the doorway, Atlas lowered his head. The German shepherd had not moved since the injection. His body remained tense, but the vibration of urgency had faded. His ears relaxed by a fraction. He did not look away from Jack, but his breathing slowed, deep and even. Whatever instinct had driven him had finally eased its grip. Emily noticed before anyone else that Atlas had sat, not collapsed, not dropped. Sat, controlled and steady, as if acknowledging that his role had shifted from warning to waiting. Time stretched. Minutes passed, heavy with attention. Jack's heart continued to find its rhythm, uneven but persistent. Each correction strengthened the next. The ventilator remained, the monitors stayed vigilant, but the sense of inevitability that had haunted the room earlier was gone. Hayes straightened slowly. "He's out of immediate danger," he said at last. No one cheered. No one spoke. Relief did not arrive as celebration. It arrived as silence. Jack did not wake immediately. His body needed time to climb back from where it had been. The antidote worked methodically, reversing damage rather than erasing it. His heart stabilized enough to sustain itself. The machines remained, but they no longer fought alone. Emily stepped back as the team settled into a new rhythm. She felt a hand touch her arm. It was Sarah Collins. Sarah had arrived quietly, having been notified through base channels when Jack was admitted. She stood tall, her posture composed despite the strain in her eyes. In the harsh hospital light, the lines around her mouth were more pronounced, shaped by years of managing pressure without letting it show. Her blonde hair was still pulled tight, her clothes neat, but her hands betrayed her, fingers laced together too tightly. "They said he turned a corner," Sarah said softly. Emily nodded. "He did?" Sarah's gaze drifted to Atlas. "That dog," she said. "He didn't stop, did he?" "No," Emily replied. "He didn't." Hours later, the room dimmed. Night gave way to early morning again, the cycle completing itself. The ocean wind continued outside, indifferent to human timelines. Jack's breathing grew more natural, less dependent. The machines remained vigilant, but the fight had eased into recovery. When Jack finally stirred, it was subtle. A faint tightening of his fingers, a shallow breath taken without assistance. His eyelids fluttered, confused, heavy. Awareness returned in fragments, stitched together by sound and sensation. The steady beep of a monitor, the faint smell of antiseptic, the weight of exhaustion pressing him back into stillness. He opened his eyes. The ceiling blurred, then sharpened. He tried to move and failed. Panic flickered, brief but sharp, until a familiar shape entered his field of vision. Atlas. The German shepherd sat beside the bed, close enough that Jack could feel the warmth of him. His head was level with the mattress, eyes steady, unblinking. When Jack's gaze met his, Atlas's ears lifted slightly. Jack swallowed. His throat felt dry, raw. "Hey," he rasped, the word barely audible. Emily was there instantly, leaning in. "Easy," she said gently. "You're safe." Jack blinked again, processing. "What happened?" Emily exchanged a glance with Hayes, then answered simply. "You collapsed. Your heart was failing. We almost lost you." Jack's eyes shifted back to Atlas. The dog had not moved. Emily followed his gaze. "He didn't leave," she said, even when everyone else thought there was nothing more to do. Jack closed his eyes briefly, the weight of that sinking in. When he opened them again, moisture blurred his vision. He lifted his hand slowly, the movement weak but deliberate. His fingers brushed against Atlas's fur, thick and warm beneath his palm. The contact grounded him in a way no machine could. "Good boy," Jack whispered. Atlas leaned into the touch just slightly, his tail giving a single, restrained thump against the floor. Jack stared at the ceiling again, breathing steadily now. For the first time in years, he did not immediately search for logic, for explanation, for control. He let the moment exist as it was. He had trusted protocols. He had trusted training. He had trusted reason. This time, something else had saved him. And for the first time in a very long while, Jack allowed himself to believe that not everything worth trusting could be measured. Weeks passed quickly, measured not in hospital beeps or careful breaths, but in early mornings and forward motion. Norfolk returned to its familiar rhythm, the harbor alive again with cranes swinging, engines rumbling, and gulls cutting sharp lines through the sky. The air smelled of salt and fuel, the kind of scent that reminded people where work began and ended. Jack Miller walked the docks just after sunrise. He moved with purpose but without hurry. His stride was steady, grounded, no longer driven by the quiet urgency that had once pushed him through every assignment. The black Navy SEAL uniform fit him the same as always, clean and precise, but something in the way he wore it had changed. His shoulders were still squared, his posture still disciplined, yet his gaze traveled more. He looked at the ground before stepping. He watched the water before turning away. He listened. Atlas walked at his side. The German shepherd was fully recovered from the tension of those days, his coat glossy, his movements smooth and confident. At 5 years old, Atlas carried the calm authority of experience, ears alert but relaxed, tail steady. He no longer pressed against Jack's leg as if guarding a wound, but he remained close, their spacing natural, unspoken. When Atlas paused, Jack paused too. They were not here for combat. Jack's role had shifted. Temporary, they had called it. Training, evaluation, oversight. He was tasked with reviewing security procedures along the port, walking routes with younger teams, identifying vulnerabilities, asking questions that did not always have immediate answers. He liked the work. A group of operators waited near a warehouse entrance, their gear neat, their expressions alert. They were younger, faster, still carrying the untested certainty Jack remembered well. One of them, a tall man named Eric Dawson, late 20s, broad-chested with restless energy in his movements, stepped forward. "Sir," Dawson said, "we've completed the sweep." Jack nodded. "Walk me through it." As they moved, Atlas drifted slightly ahead, nose low, eyes scanning. Dawson watched the dog with interest. "He's sharp." Jack did not smile. "He listens." Dawson hesitated, then asked, "To commands?" Jack stopped walking. Atlas stopped too. Jack turned to face the group. "To everything?" They resumed. Jack asked questions, not just about lines of sight and access points, but about smells, sounds, changes in wind direction. At first, the operators answered stiffly, unsure. Then they loosened. They began to notice things they had ignored minutes earlier. A loose latch, a shadow that didn't match the sun, a container that hummed when others did not. Atlas paused near a stack of crates. Jack did not call him back immediately. He waited. Atlas sniffed once, twice, then moved on. Nothing there. The moment passed without alarm. "That pause," Jack said to the group. "That matters?" They finished the route by late afternoon. The sun had shifted west, light warming the water and turning the metal surfaces soft and amber. The younger team dispersed, quieter now, thoughtful. Jack remained at the edge of the pier. Sarah Collins approached, clipboard tucked under her arm. She looked rested, her movements less rigid than they had been weeks earlier. The strain in her face had softened, replaced by something steadier. "You look better," she said. "So do you," Jack replied. She nodded toward Atlas. "He's been checking on you every day?" Jack glanced down. Atlas looked back up at him, calm and present. "He never stopped." Sarah hesitated, then spoke more quietly. "You scared people, more than you realize." Jack absorbed that without defense. "I know." She watched the water for a moment. "You're not going back out right away." "No." "And that's okay?" Jack thought of the bed, the monitors, the stillness. He thought of the scratch he had ignored. "It is." Sarah smiled once, small but genuine. "Good." She left him there, the sound of her footsteps fading into the harbor noise. The sun began its descent. Atlas sat beside Jack, their shadows stretching long across the pier. The water reflected gold and copper, rippling gently against the concrete. Somewhere behind them, a horn sounded, low and distant. Jack crouched, resting his forearms on his knees. He scratched Atlas behind the ears, slow and deliberate. The dog leaned into the touch, eyes half-lidded. "I miss things," Jack said quietly. He wasn't sure why he said it aloud. He just knew Atlas would hear him. Atlas's ears flicked. "I thought listening meant following orders," Jack continued. "Turns out it means paying attention." The wind shifted, bringing cooler air off the water. Atlas lifted his head, sniffed once, then settled again. Jack stood and took a step forward. Atlas moved with him. They walked along the pier as the sun slipped below the horizon, the sky deepening into blue and gray. Lights flickered on behind them, one by one. The day ended the way it always did, but Jack felt the difference. He did not rush. He did not ignore the quiet signals. He listened, and as the harbor settled into night, a man and a dog continued forward together, slower than before, steadier than ever, no longer blind to the small things that kept them alive. This story is not only about survival, it is about listening. There was a moment when machines spoke louder than hearts, when knowledge reached its limit, and when every logical answer had been exhausted. And yet, life returned not through force, but through persistence, loyalty, and a quiet instinct that refused to leave. Some call that instinct training. Some call it love. But many of us would recognize it as something deeper. Sometimes God does not shout. Sometimes He whispers. He speaks through small signs we overlook, through a feeling we ignore, through a voice that does not fit our plans, through a presence that refuses to give up on us, even when we give up on ourselves. In daily life, we rush. We trust schedules, systems, and screens. But how often do we pause and listen to our conscience, to our intuition, to the quiet warning in our heart? Faith is not always a miracle that looks like lightning from the sky. Sometimes faith is a delay, a pause, a second look, a decision to listen when it would be easier to walk away. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs hope today. If it reminded you to slow down and listen, leave a comment. If you believe that God can work through loyalty, love, and quiet courage, subscribe to this channel for more stories like this. And if you are watching right now and carrying something heavy, may God protect you. May He guide your steps. May He open your eyes to the signs meant to save you. If you believe, type Amen in the comments.